Imagine that every single decision you've ever made, from choosing what to eat for breakfast to deciding whether to text your ex at 2 a.m., isn't actually being made by the you that you think you know. What if your mind is actually a battlefield where three invisible forces are constantly fighting for control of your behavior? That person who cut you off in traffic, they're not just being rude, they're experiencing an internal war. That friend who always seems to have their life together. Same battle, different outcome. Today we're diving deep into Sigmund Freud's most famous theory, the id, ego and superego, and by the end of this video, you'll never look at human behavior the same way again. Welcome to another deep dive into psychology. Before we jump in, let's address the elephant in the room. Sigmund Freud is probably one of the most polarizing figures in psychology. The guy literally believed that if you bite your nails or smoke too much, it stems from breastfeeding issues in infancy. He thought little boys have an irrational fear that their fathers might castrate them. But here's why we still study him over a century later. When you step back and look at his ideas as a whole, they provide an incredibly unique lens for understanding human behavior and personality development. His theory of the id, ego, and superego isn't just academic jargon. It's a framework that can help you understand why you do what you do, why you feel what you feel, and why change can be so difficult. To understand Freud's theory, we need to start with his famous iceberg metaphor. Picture an iceberg floating in the ocean. The tiny tip above water represents what Freud called the conscious mind. Everything you're aware of right now, your thoughts, memories, feelings about that text you need to send back. But the vast majority of your mental activity happens below the surface, completely hidden from your conscious awareness. This is the unconscious mind, and according to Freud, this hidden part is actually controlling your behavior. Now, if the unconscious was filled with happy memories and pleasant thoughts, life would be great. Unfortunately, it's more like a psychological junkyard packed with traumatic memories, disturbing thoughts, taboo desires, and painful emotions that are too difficult for our conscious mind to handle. We all have intrusive thoughts about hurting others or ourselves. We have embarrassing memories. We have socially unacceptable desires. We experience rage, hatred, and jealousy. These dark, uncomfortable aspects don't just disappear. They get pushed down into the unconscious through a defense mechanism called repression. Repression is like a psychological bouncer keeping disturbing stuff out of your conscious mind. But these thoughts and feelings are still there, still active, still influencing your behavior from the shadows. Now we get to the main event, the three forces battling for control of your psyche. Let's start with the id, which lives entirely in the unconscious mind. The id is what you're born with. Think of a newborn baby. That's pure id. It's driven by primal animalistic drives. Despite being intelligent, at our core, we still have a caveman brain driven toward immediate pleasure: food, water, warmth, sex, comfort. Freud broke these drives into two categories. First, eros, the life instinct that drives us to survive, reproduce, and experience joy. But after witnessing World War I's horrors, Freud realized we also have thanatos, the death instinct. This explains self-destructive behaviors like extreme sports, substance abuse, or toxic relationships. The id operates on the pleasure principle. It wants what it wants now. Think about eating that extra slice of cake, scrolling social media instead of working, or procrastinating on important tasks. That's your id demanding immediate gratification. Fun fact: Freud never used id, ego, and superego. He wrote in German, and the original word for id was es, meaning it. This makes more sense because the id is like a thing. It's not rational, doesn't think about consequences. It just acts, like a baby crying when it wants something, regardless of whether parents are sleeping. The energy fueling the id is the libido, not just about sex, but the psychological fuel driving all pleasure-seeking behaviors. But we can't just run around acting on every impulse. We can't steal whatever we want, hit people we don't like, or fall asleep during important meetings. This is where the ego comes in. The ego is the I. It's you as you experience yourself. Unlike the id, which is purely unconscious, the ego operates across both conscious and unconscious levels. It's the part of your mind that deals with reality. While the id operates on the pleasure principle, the ego operates on the reality principle. It understands there are consequences for actions, social norms to follow, relationships to maintain, laws to obey. You can't drive 150 miles just because you want to. There are speed limits and police officers. Freud used a brilliant analogy. The ego is like a horseback rider, and the id is like a wild horse. The rider constantly tries to control and direct the horse, but sometimes it feels like you're just holding on for dear life, while this powerful force does whatever it wants. The ego's job is to moderate. It doesn't eliminate the id's desires, but that would create massive anxiety. Instead, it finds ways to satisfy the id's needs while taking reality into account. This is delayed gratification. The ego says, okay, you can have what you want, but not right now, and not in that way. When the ego struggles to control the id's demands, it employs defense mechanisms like repression. Sometimes repressed thoughts slip through in dreams, slips of the tongue, or accidental behaviors that aren't actually accidental. If personality was just the id wanting things, and the ego figuring out how to get them realistically, things might be simple. But around age 5, we develop a third force, the superego. The superego is like having a strict judge in your head. While the id operates on the pleasure principle and the ego on the reality principle, the superego operates on the moral principle. It's constantly asking, what's the right thing to do? It becomes our conscience, our moral compass. Here's where it gets problematic. The superego isn't just about being good. It's about internalized perfectionism. We internalize the voices of authority figures, parents, teachers, society, and create what Freud called the ego ideal. This is an impossible standard of perfection we'll never achieve. The original German word über ich literally means over I. This makes more sense because the superego creates an idealized version of yourself that's so far above what you can actually achieve that you're constantly falling short. Let's say you have a test tomorrow. Your ID says, don't study, go have fun, hang out with friends. Your ego says, you need to study for at least a few hours. But your superego says, not only do you need to study, you need to get an A+. You need to be perfect. The superego is the source of shame and guilt. When you don't live up to its impossible standards, it punishes you with feelings of worthlessness. People with overactive superegos feel like they're never good enough, feel guilty about enjoying pleasurable activities, and are constantly anxious about not meeting perfectionistic standards. Here's what's happening in your mind according to Freud. 3 forces constantly battling for control. Your id is like that friend who always wants to have fun and skip responsibilities. Let's order pizza instead of cooking. Let's binge watch Netflix instead of cleaning. Let's buy those shoes we can't afford. Your ego is the responsible adult trying to keep everyone happy while dealing with reality. Okay, we can order pizza, but let's get a small one with vegetables. We can watch 1 episode, then tidy up. We can look at those shoes, but let's check our budget first. Your superego is the perfectionist parent who's never satisfied. Pizza? Do you know how many calories are in pizza? You should be meal prepping. You shouldn't be watching TV. You should be reading something educational. Those shoes? You shouldn't be thinking about material possessions. The key to psychological health is balance. Problems arise when one force becomes too dominant. An overactive id leads to impulsive, self-destructive behavior. An overactive superego leads to guilt, anxiety, and perfectionism. An overactive ego can lead to being overly rational and disconnected from both desires and morality. Understanding these 3 forces can help you make sense of internal conflicts you experience every day. Ever wonder why dieting is so hard? Your id wants the immediate pleasure of junk food. Your superego judges you for every bad food choice, and your ego is trying to find a sustainable middle ground. Ever struggle with procrastination? Your id wants immediate gratification from easy, pleasurable activities. Your superego demands perfection, making tasks feel overwhelming. Your ego is trying to get things done without the anxiety of perfectionism or guilt of avoidance. Ever feel guilty about taking time for yourself? That's your superego telling you self-care is selfish, while your id desperately needs rest and pleasure, and your ego is trying to negotiate a healthy balance. Understanding these dynamics can help you approach personal change with more compassion and strategy. Instead of judging yourself for having conflicting desires, you can recognize that internal conflict is a normal part of human psychology. Freud's theories have been heavily criticized by modern psychology. Many of his ideas lack empirical support, and his theories were developed based on a very limited sample of patients in a specific time and place. Modern psychology has moved beyond Freud's original ideas. We now understand that personality development is influenced by genetics, neurobiology, cultural factors, and social learning, not just unconscious conflicts and childhood experiences. However, some core insights remain valuable. The idea that much of our mental activity happens outside conscious awareness has been supported by modern neuroscience. The concept that we have conflicting motivations and that psychological health involves managing these conflicts is still relevant today. So there you have it, Freud's theory of the id, ego, and superego. Whether you buy into his specific ideas or not, this framework offers a fascinating way to think about the complexity of human motivation and behavior. The next time you find yourself in an internal struggle, whether it's about what to eat, how to spend your time, or what decision to make, try identifying which voices are speaking. Is that your id demanding immediate gratification? Your superego imposing impossible standards? Your ego trying to find a realistic middle ground? Remember, the goal isn't to eliminate any of these forces. They all serve important functions. The id connects us to our desires and drives. The superego connects us to our values and morality. The ego helps us navigate the complex reality of being human. The key is balance. What do you think? Do you recognize these three forces in your own life? Drop a comment below with an example of how you've experienced this internal battle. And if you found this video helpful, give it a thumbs up and subscribe for more deep dives into psychology. Next week, we're going to explore Freud's defense mechanisms, those unconscious strategies your mind uses to protect you from psychological pain. Trust me, you won't want to miss it. Thanks for watching, and remember, understanding your mind is the first step toward mastering it. I'll see you next time.